councillors and to our visitors. Kiri, welcome. Kia ora. And we'll start off, I think, with a karakia, and I think it's on the board. Does anyone want us to lead us in that? We know the words by heart now. It's going to lead us in that. Martin, can you help out here?
Very, very pleased to. You know how it goes, everyone. Please do join me. Whakataka taho, e te uru, whakataka taho, e te tōna, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tarata ki tai. E hi ake ana, e ata, e te o, e hura, e heiho, i hei mauri wana.
Thank you so much for that. Just like to extend a warm welcome to both Hamish and George, and firstly to seek the guidance of the committee as to the prospect of bumping you folk up the order in terms of the report from the Tourism Hawkesbury. Is that be okay with everyone to do that? We'll make that the first order of business, but firstly I'll call for any conflict of interest declarations. Are there any conflicts at all to declare today? There being none. Are there any, sorry, I should have asked for apologies. I think Councillor just got an apology for an early exit.
Yes, thank you, Chair, I do. So I'll be early exit at 2:30.
Great, thank you.
And Mike Paku.
Mike Paku, there's another apology. Peter Eden. Yep. So I have a mover to receive those apologies. Thank you, Councillor Foss, Councillor Van Beek. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
That's carried. We'll now move to confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of June. I'm all assuming everyone has had the opportunity to look at those minutes, and are there any items that need to be corrected in those minutes that people want to notify? None. The minutes, can I have someone to confirm that they were a true and accurate record? Thank you, Councillor Ormsby. As I've got a second for that. Thank you, Councillor Lambert. My pleasure. All those in favour of receiving those minutes will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. That is carried. We will go to the follow-up items from the previous meeting, and that's on our page 3.
What about matters arising from the agenda?
I've joined the 21st century, Councillor. Are there any matters arising from the follow-ups there?
So, Chair, we'll just take those as read. Both of those have been actioned or in action.
Thank you. No questions on those, councillors? We'll take those. Can I have a mover that that report be received? Thank you. That's Councillor Barker. Councillor Lambert will second those. All those in favour of receiving that report will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. That's carried. I'll now call for minor items for the agenda. Are there any minor items that someone wants to discuss? No minor items. Thank you for that. Look, we've got a very substantive and detailed agenda in front of us today, and I'm trying to get through as much through for Councillor Taylor as possible while she's still with us. So we'll rattle on, and as we've agreed, we will take the report, the 6-monthly update, which you'll find on your page 49, and we've got the Chair and Executive here to discuss those, and we'll hand that over to you gentlemen to take us through. Thank you. Thank you, George. Thank you, Hamish.
Kia ora. Kia ora tātou, nei rata mihi, kui hui mai nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thanks very much for giving us this time today and the opportunity to just share with you some of the issues that we're dealing with from Hawkesbury Tourism's perspective. It's been a little while since we've come together to talk about this, and I think this is clearly a consequence of what's been happening in our industry over the last 2 years, which is nothing short of dramatic, I'd have to put it that way. Certainly for this last time, we've had a focus in Hawkesbury tourism of keeping our industry alive and maintaining our share of what was a diminishing market, and if we could, improving our share of that. And to a large extent, that's really been achieved. As you know, Hawkesbury is a predominantly domestic market, and really for the last 2 years, the tourism industry in New Zealand has been dominated by domestic tourism, with all regions fighting for their share of it. And as I shared with this committee some time ago, our concern was to make sure that as a region we didn't miss out on that. And the good part about that is we haven't. We've actually improved the percentage of the market that we're getting. And the real issue for us from now on is ensuring, as the tourism industry starts to grow back quite strongly, that we maintain our position within that. And we're seeing some really good signs in terms of the return of international travel, obviously the return of cruise and a few other things that are happening. And most of the businesses, and I'm involved in a few others around the country, are starting to look at a market this year that looks probably 50% of the international market that we were achieving in 2019, which is somewhat remarkable actually, and higher than we had predicted. So that's the good news. It's still not anywhere near what it was, but it's certainly on a growth trajectory, and everybody's starting to see how they deal with that. There are challenges. Staffing is one of them, but at least what we're all looking towards is an improving situation, not the challenges that we've had certainly over the last couple of years, which have been quite extraordinary. And I think the industry's shown incredible resilience to come through this, and by and large, the high proportion of tourism industries have survived. Certainly some have gone, and maybe they were a bit, they were probably difficult anyway, but what we're left with is a core of pretty good businesses that are starting to look at the future. What's happened as part of this is that a new element has emerged, which in a sense the government funded, and that was to start looking a little bit more deeply at how tourism businesses and the tourism industry connects with its local communities. And this was born a little out of this sort of feeling that perhaps this social licence, as it was called, was being tested by volume tourism in New Zealand, and there were sort of a bit of blowback from some communities about this. And the consequence of that was the suggestion that we needed to think more about the destination management as well as its marketing. And that's really one of the things that's been going on over the last 12 months. So the government has funded a number of initiatives, almost for every region in this country, around thinking of what their destination management environment might be, not just the marketing side of it. So it's a new lens. As with all things government, they've funded the analysis but not the implementation, which is helpful, to say the least. But the good news is they've given us a template to look again at the region and think about it from a region-wide perspective, with a new lens on the future. And I think that it's entirely appropriate. Look, our issues here are different from the issues that are in Queenstown or Rotorua or anywhere else. We have a different dynamic completely, so it needs to be fit for purpose. But what we're looking at now is what might that plan be for this region, and what might we, as the regional tourism body, play the best role in leading that in conjunction with the other partners that are here. And obviously that's the regional council, the city councils that we deal with, and other parties in the region. So I just thought today it would be useful to just explore briefly some of the issues that this addresses and where we go to from here. So this is an MB strategy. There's lots of acronyms around here. Support, Recovery and Reset Plan. There's a myriad of these, but fundamentally it's about a visitor strategy for tourism in Hawke's Bay, and it's virtually our version of a destination management plan. It sets out a future state for the visitor economy, and the work program that's required to achieve it. And it also draws on a wide range of contributions, including industry, council partners and key stakeholders. Now, this has come from a lot of work that's been done interviewing people within the region and starting to get a sort of a concept of what might be the best way forward. The core elements to this are, first of all, obviously brand and promotion. We still need to create demand. We're not full, there's no doubt about that, but we've got plenty of capacity to welcome more people here and to increase the economic impact. We need to look at the product we have as a region and how we might broaden that, and how it might go a little bit deeper, and particularly in terms of some of our iwi connections. What are the elements about funding and community support? And also, let's also think about the infrastructure and public amenities that need to be done to support that. So this is not all something that Hawkesbury Tourism is responsible for or can do, but it's certainly something that we need to put on the landscape of managing this destination in the best way possible for the community that lives here, but also the visitors that join us. The key considerations coming out of the review was that it needs to be demand-driven, continue to target growth for the benefit of all. It needs to be grounded in a work program that develops deeper connections with the community, and I think this is probably one of the more consistent things that have come out of it of all of these reviews, is how do local communities understand the true value of tourism, how they can benefit from it and participate in it. It must be led by the principles of sustainability and regenerative tourism. This term, regenerative tourism, is something you've probably heard the Minister of Tourism talk a little about at the moment, and it's the notion that tourism actually contributes in a unique way to communities, in that it helps them revive as well as simply take the economic benefit from it. And there are a number of examples around the country where this is starting to be identified. It's a new term, it's a new concept, but it has value, and it's certainly being adopted. Or when I say adopted, it's certainly being investigated quite significantly. Obviously, there needs to be links to Matariki, the regional development strategy, and we've looked at how we might dovetail with that particular program, and that looks pretty good. And finally, it's a collective regional effort, championed by us, but with support of all partners. So I think if I could say that, where we're at now, and I have to go back and say that after over 10 years in this role with you, I think this is probably the first time that we've actually got the full landscape of tourism's connection and opportunity within the region presented in a document that we can all work towards. And we've tried this a long time, and if you go back for a while, we had disparate councils with different approaches. We're lucky now, that's much more integrated. There's a general acceptance that the brand is Hawke's Bay, and there are people within that. But coming out of that, I think we now need to have perhaps a stronger view on what the future might look like for tourism in this region and how it could better connect to the people of the community. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but we have started. So the current strategic actions that we're involved in is, first of all, to cement the food and wine country positioning. Now, this is something that we've been quietly doing over the last 2 to 3 years. And it's a strategy, it's a defensive strategy. We don't want any other region of New Zealand to own this piece of territory. This is us. We are the food bowl of the nation. And we need, within our own work, to ensure that that's the way it's seen, and that we protect that. And right now, if you look at any promotion on this region, you'll find that they just subtly refer to it as, I'm visiting food and wine country. They're starting to understand the importance of this. Now, this obviously goes beyond just food and wine, but it is the one unique thing that we as a region have that we can own, and we certainly don't want anyone else to own it, because it fits our lifestyle and it fits our image, and it's why people predominantly come here. One of the elements that we're working on at the moment, which actually reinforces that, is that it's been proposed that Hawke's Bay would become one of the great wine capitals of the world. There's only one chosen from each country, and we've been chosen. We're not there yet. We've got to go through some effort, but we're working with the wine industry on this because being identified as a wine capital of the world alongside the likes of Napa, Bordeaux, etc., is pretty good. And if we can cement that position, again, it reinforces the quality of our food and wine positioning. So that's ongoing work that's happening at the moment. It's got some exciting potential, and we'll be doing everything we can to bring that fruition, and it's certainly a good part of the branding exercise for our region. We undertook a review of the Hawke's Bay Trails. As you know, this is a major area of visitor interest these days, and there's some opportunity there to make them better, I think it'd be fair to say. We have a strong network of bicycle opportunities in this region, but we don't have a cohesive product, if I could put it that way, which is what a lot of visitors want. And so we're looking at how they can be better presented and connected in a way which would provide people with a multi-day experience here. And we've conducted the review. We're starting to work with people. We do need to set up a process that allows people to contribute to this so that this can actually continue to add to the region. This is the, as they say, this is the sort of the new golf. It's extraordinary the amount of people that are actually engaged in this. It's people my age with motors on their bikes, reliving their youth, and it's going everywhere. So we want to be part of it. We've got the product, we just need to have the presentation of it, and there's a bit of work to be done there. We have been involved in Te Mata a Maui initiative with Ngā Toi in Hawke's Bay. We're continuing to work with that with Ngāti Kahungunu about how we will start to present landscape stories that the industry can use. And that work is ongoing, and we hopefully that towards the end of this year we've started to get some product that the industry can use. And the final little note that's come up is the potential for an apple festival for the region, which, given that we sort of own apples in the country, this has been scoped, and we think has also some really good potential if we can get this right. So that's being reviewed and discussed at the moment. So they're just a few of the things that are on our radar right now. But fundamentally, our task over the next 6 to 12 months is to ensure that we take part in the recovery of tourism as it starts to occur in this country, that we start to present within the region a broader view of how tourism and the destination could be managed for the future, for everybody's comfort and ambition, and that within that we're helping lead it, but we're also involved in key initiatives that will lift that profiling. So that's all I really wanted to present to you, other than you have been given a copy of some of the key performance stats there over the last 6 months, which show the sort of spend and everything. When you're reading that, remember those spends look good, but they are down. Everyone's down, obviously, for obvious reasons. But the recovery's on its way, and we're all starting to get quite excited about the future, if not a little apprehensive about how we're going to cope with it. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time too.
Many thanks, George, and I'll just comment that tourism in this region and the country and the world has faced its probably biggest challenge, probably ever, really. In the last 2 years has probably been the most challenging, particularly for regions like ours. And so therefore, and I think the landscape has changed forever. So we need to recognise that not only from an epidemics perspective, but also from emissions and the prospect of more limited travel opportunity. So looking forward, and the job of Hawke's Bay Tourism is very much, if you like, examining where we position ourselves into that future. Tourism Hawke's Bay is our biggest spend from a council's perspective for service beyond the walls of council. and it's therefore important for us to examine that with some alacrity. Hamish, you want to comment on particularly that image you've got there of the key metrics. If you could just cover that very briefly.
I think the important part with the key metrics that were in our report is that while spend as a value is down across New Zealand, and obviously Hawke's Bay was affected by that, we did also manage during that time to grow market share. So that means that we've actually taken spend or share of spend from other regions. So that's part of the good news story. The challenge is also, though, for many of our tourism operators, the reality is that some were perhaps pitched more towards international visitors than they were domestic visitors. So whilst spend has been up and the domestic market has been great for this region, it hasn't been great for everybody. I think one of the other things that we have noted over this time as well is that I think we can all note as residents here that without those visitor numbers, without some of our international visitors, we're noticing probably some of our favourite restaurants and cafes, some of our hospitality are struggling to offer the types of hospitality that we enjoyed 2 years ago. We know that some of them are operating at 5 nights a week where we'd love them to be open 7 days. We know that Hawke's Bay is probably increasingly turning into a long weekend destination, and some of our places close more on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So we're hoping that we will see the international backpackers and market coming back to help us supply our hospitality sector with that type of workforce. And I think also it will be interesting, pre-COVID we had something like 16 backpacker properties. Currently we've probably got about 3 on the books. So it's going to be interesting also to see that type of accommodation availability come back for some of those hospitality and actually horticultural workers as well, which is just so important to this region. But yeah, otherwise happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hamish. I'll just get comment and question perhaps from Councillor Foss and Councillor Ormsby.
I'm retired.
You're retired.
Yes, I am.
Councillor Foss.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, Hamish and George. It's a pleasure as I am part of the board for Hawke's Bay Tourism. First of all, on all those KPIs, all bar one, which is the sustainability survey, I think, you're green and ticking the box. Thanks very much. Well done, your team. Have you seen an emergency import in that? Because that language probably wasn't in your reports of a year or 2 years ago, I don't think. And then just a bit more about what does food and wine country positioning / the great wine capitals mean? So I think you mentioned earlier at the start, George, we're the food bowl, or the fruit bowl actually, I think you said. Just
Food bowl of the nation, yeah.
is this about people jumping on planes, coming to Hawke's Bay because you've done such a great job marketing the place? End of story? Or do you want to expand on that?
Start.
You go, you sound like you're ready.
2 minutes of that.
No, look, I think that we, as a great growing destination and a place that also exports significantly, that to think about provenance and also to think about our visitors when they come to Hawke's Bay actually having a Hawke's Bay experience, that it's that concept also of sustainability, that our hospitality, our offering is actually generated by the growers and producers in Hawke's Bay, and that has got to be one of the best and specific experiences in the country that Hawke's Bay can well and truly own, and therefore having a Hawke's Bay food and beverage experience by Hawke's Bay in Hawke's Bay has got to be a great story.
To me, this goes much deeper than just tourism. This is the DNA of the region in a sense. And when we've done a lot of work in trying to just establish, is this the truth? And it is. When you look at the majority of the food that's produced here, Hawke's Bay is dominant in many of those areas, whether it be apples or squash or whatever. It's not everything, but there's enough critical mass there to start highlighting how important the food and wine element of Hawke's Bay is. We're not the biggest wine region, but we're diverse and we're high quality. So it provides, as I say, a DNA to everything that we do here, which is connected, and that again breeds off into what those particular businesses might do. We would like to do a lot more around the provenance of food, we'd like to see some of the food producers start looking at how they can enter the visitor industry as well. So it's opening up a broader palette for Hawkesbury to be presented to the world. And it's when we start thinking of things like sustainability and regenerative tourism, well, high quality food connected, well connected through sustainability is where the future is. And I think we want to position this region so it can capture that and perhaps lead the country in it. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Can I just add one more thing? With our annual event, Fork Food and Wine Classic, with the Food and Wine Country positioning, we're able to include and are including events in the program that we will be launching next week in Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa District, as well as Hastings and Napier. So actually it goes right across the region, which I think is a fantastic story.
Thank you for that. I think there was a question from Councillor Van Beek about a cherry festival. Have you got a question?
No, I've got a comment. So regarding your report on Hawkesbury Trails, which of course you know are managed by Hawkesbury Regional Council, and I think it's very important the comment you made that you're actually going to have that discussion with the wider community as well, who have an input in that, because I think that's really a market where the change is happening. Just been in Central Otago, and it was just, I've never queued so much in my life. It's just incredible. But what they actually have been able to do, that they actually have added the active transport to their total brand. And I think we can do something similar, because our active transport actually, and you definitely see it over there, is actually where people spend longer times in cafes, bars, restaurants, where they take a rest before they actually do the next tranche. And they actually spend a lot more, where I see buses with or minivans with Australians having a swig of wine and then moving on again, actually very short steps. And so I think there's real mileage to be had to actually our climate, as well as the already existing network, extending it with cohesion and also beautification, and actually making it more comfortable. And making it more comfortable is actually very important, especially if you're the older age tourist that actually will be coming. So I think you're on the right track there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you both for the presentation. And Hamish, we've had this discussion before, but it was just between you and me and not everyone else. So I'll open it up again. There needs to be a real transition now between the domestic tourists and start catering again for the international. You say we already have those gaps. Our restaurants are not open as often, and same with our retail. You didn't mention that, but I'm saying that because my concern is that 87 cruise ships are expected to visit Napier Port and Hawke's Bay over 65 days between October 22 and May 23. That's really soon. So I would like to know what Tourism Hawke's Bay is doing to connect, there's that connections with community, with retailers, cafe owners, restaurants, so that we can start transitioning to being open again for the international market.
Great questions. So we actually have a regular kōrero monthly with some key sort of groups and representatives, which include Napier Business Association, Hastings City Business Association, Havelock North, various, because it's the same with events as well. So just having that knowledge of what's happening and when right across the board. And in fact, we'll be having our second of 3 special cruise workshops, and one of those will be specifically also with the Napier Business Association to ensure that they are conscious of not only the days that the ships arrive, but we've spent some time also profiling each ship to have an understanding of what the per person spend might be, how many people might be on board that ship, so we can provide that to the retailers. Because if we've got 3,000 or 4,000 people coming off a ship one morning at 8 in the morning and shops don't open until 10, or they're not staffed, then our retailers actually, they need that type of information so that they can make the decision as to whether they will open on those days and how many people they will need to staff or resource that. At the same time, we're also talking about how we communicate that with our community so that our community can also make an informed decision that if there's 2 ships in and might be 5,000 people, right across the region, but there might be a concentrated number also in either of the cities, that they can make that decision as to whether they'll feel comfortable coming into the centre of the city that morning as well. So it involves all of those, so we're definitely having those conversations.
Thanks, Hamish. That's brilliant. Just another question, please, Chair. This now goes on to your principles of sustainability and regenerative tourism. So with our goals as a region to be net carbon zero, I do think also that many tourist operators, in fact, most people are becoming more aware of being net carbon zero and doing their bit for the environment. How are you, Tourism Hawke's Bay, engaging with your tourist operators to become more environmentally focused and sustainable?
Thank you. So it's firstly the Tourism Industry Association, Tourism Industry Aotearoa, have created a tourism sustainability commitment which we have been well and truly encouraging all of our businesses to be a part of. In addition to that, various quality measures such as Qualmark have an expectation also of sustainability through that. And over the next 2 months, we're running 3 workshops on tourism sustainability commitment with our businesses. The challenge is that there's the desire to get involved in the sustainability. The challenge is having the tools to be able to do that, having the tools to be able to measure carbon, and then having the tools, once you've measured carbon, to work out how you offset that and take other measurements. And so we are working with our operators to workshop that, to help them do that, so that that goal of 2050 is not only well achieved, but hopefully we've got many businesses well on track before that.
We've also got 52 businesses so far signed up to sustainability, which is, and it'll just have to ramp up. Everybody has to get on board with this thing.
Yeah, well done. Thank you so much.
Chair's preoccupied, so I'll jump in here.
Sorry.
I was next.
Yeah. Councillor
Job for
Ormsby.
a job or a break?
Please have turned up.
Where you go, Councillor?
Well, tēnā koroa, lovely to see you again. And I suppose this is an opportunity for a plug, because with the review of the trails, our trails, and however you look at the promotion of the trails to make sure there's better realignment, also consider our regional parks that are close to our trails as part of that. What do we offer a visitor? Because our regional parks are a part of our open spaces as well as our trails. So just a consideration there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We've got a condensed day today. Are there any other final questions? If not, thank you. Great to see you, and a year we can long remember with results that tell a story in their own right. But I think the challenge is that going forward we need to really set the platform for the next few years, particularly with the product. So interested to see you come back in the new trainee, for those that are still here, and hear what you've got to say about what the next 3 years is going to bring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I also just finish off by saying thank you very much for the support that we've received from this council throughout. It's been a tough time, but everybody's committed to the future, and I think we've got a good plan for the future as well. So we look forward to working with you on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Van Beek, you moved that we received that report. Yep. Thank you. Councillor Foss seconded that. Those in favour will say aye.
All right.
That's carried. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you in the future at Bristol.
What about the extensions?
The extensions, there being none. Can we now move to our decision item? That's item 6. It's on page 9. And who's going to talk to that? Is that you, Susie? Do you want to come forward and give us the benefit of your wisdom? So you've had a very significant lead up to this. We've had consultation, we've had quite a trial on it. And now we're up to the, if you like, the technical business end in terms of adopting or enabling the agreement to take place. Do you want to just précis that very briefly, Susie?
Thank you, councillor. You've actually done a great intro for me. So the purpose today is to seek approval to execute into the agreement, into the regional shared service agreement, and also seek approval for the CEO to have signing authority to sign into that agreement. I do just want to highlight that you have seen this come through this various meetings 3 to 4 times. Including preparation to enter into this agreement and public consultation as well in April, May earlier this year. What will happen is we will seek to have a shareholding. We will be given a Class A share for $1, and that will give us a seat at the table in terms of that organisation, and also it will allow a position on the board. Going forward, the purpose of this organisation is to seek activities to help the regional sector. There is a program of work, although future business cases are expected to be presented to the future board for consideration, which will eventuate into, should they be accepted, future funding arrangements and seeking funding to support those agreements.
Sorry, let me interrupt you. You all done?
Yes.
Thank you, Susie. Sorry, my apologies, jumping in. James, do you want to comment, please?
So I know there's been, and not just within our region, but around the country, some ambiguity, I think, about the purpose of this exercise, and maybe it's a bit of a communication challenge that we haven't quite got on top of. The reason that this has come about is that historically, regional councils in New Zealand have collaborated on a range of initiatives whereby we've got common interests, particularly engaging central government or common areas of need, technical need, and that has grown up over time from the ground floor where individual functions within councils, and it might be our biosecurity managers forum, or it's our water quality technicians, etc., get together with their colleagues around New Zealand and have typically chipped 5K in here or maybe 10,000 to commission a piece of work that everybody benefits from. And it's been premised on let's not reinvent wheels and let's pool our resources on common areas of common need. And paragraph 10 of the paper, there's a list of some of those. The Freshwater Implementation Program, EMA, which is Environmental Monitoring Reporting, LAWA, which is the Land, Air, Water, Aotearoa national website we have for environmental monitoring, etc., etc. All these little things have grown up over time and they haven't been consolidated, coordinated under an overall business plan, and they haven't had full visibility. And so the Regional Council Chief Executives commissioned a piece of work about 2 years ago that was reported last year on how do we pull all this together in a way that's more professional, that's not an ad hoc set of initiatives where typically what happened is one council said, I'll be the banker, I'll send out an invoice to all the other councils and you'll send me some money and then I'll run a project. How do we pull this all together into one entity that's got proper governance and proper planning around it? It just so happened that the regional sector already had an entity, which was Regional Software Holdings, which has been a collaboration between councils to develop an IT platform for regulatory purposes. That's Iris, which we run and we use, and we license off RSHL for that purpose. So we had a ready-made existing vehicle that we could put all of that existing activity into to oversee and govern it. Your total spend as a council at the moment is about $185,000 a year across all of those initiatives that goes into a total of $3.6 million that the regional sector pulled together to deliver a range of programs and initiatives that are in our collective benefit. So this is really, it's a bit of a process step. It's about creating an entity to pull all that together. There's no additional financial implication for council at this time. In the future, if we're going to do more significant activity collectively as a group of regional councils with financial implications, that would be something you would expect to come back through annual plan and long-term plan processes. So hopefully that demystifies it somewhat.
Great, thanks, James. Committee, that you'll note in the attachments there's a shareholder agreement and a constitution. Are there any questions that arise for you out of those documents. They're somewhat of a done deal because we're the last cab off the rank in terms of this process, remembering that it's a negotiation across, 16 authorities, is that right? Or
With 16 potential members at the moment, there's a floating, I think we're up to about 11 who are either in or in the process of joining.
So making changes is quite convoluted, but Councillor Foss.
Hi, 2 questions, please. Just what are the risks, as you see it, if any, to this organisation other than $1 of equity? And then the second part is, in the constitution and our attachments, is that the existing constitution? Because there's the shareholders there and a board, of which there'll be 4 to 8. And I think in our last discussion, James, you would be a director on it.
No, so I would be able to be nominated.
You could be nominated,
and could
sorry.
put myself forward. That's a decision we haven't yet sort of taken, but yeah. So
that's the old constitution on there then?
It's the existing constitution that by buying a share for $1, I understand we become party to, but the constitution will need amendment probably at the next AGM to update it.
Okay, and sorry, and from the finance kind of side of things, any risks you foresee other than the $1?
No, obviously, from a control influence point of view, that Class A share will get us, as I said, a seat at the table to be able to influence. But we will be one of many, but that will obviously rely on regional sector CEs or whoever that board is in engagement. So, and any future business case, obviously, in terms of future funding, which will be part of any LTP, presumably, depending on that spend, will need to be incorporated. At this stage, I can't see anything material.
Thanks.
Councillor Barker.
Putting the alternative hat on, what can you see as the advantages, positives here? And could you estimate what sort of gains we'd make over the $1 that we're going to invest as a percentage?
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure how to address it. There should be and will be future financial benefits in terms of cost saving and efficiencies in processes.
So we get a gain of $1, we've got 100% return on our investment.
Hopefully.
Right, there being no further questions, we've got recommendations 1 to 4 on page. Are there any other questions I should ask you? We've got recommendations 1 to 4 on page, item 6, page 11. The substantive one being recommendation 4 to delegate to the CEO to sign the shareholder agreement deed of accession on behalf of council. Can I have a mover to that direction? That's Councillor Barker, and Councillor Van Beek has seconded that. Any comment from gentlemen at all? Any other comment? I'll just make one comment. James, it was music to my ear to hear you say that you'll be that in the first meeting you'll be considering the revamp of the Constitution, because if you read the objectives, the eyes glaze over as to what it's going to be doing. So if we can have some little input, I assumed it was some sort of bouncy castle franchise that you were developing, but obviously not. If we can have that changed and be more specific as to what's actually wanting to achieve, would be useful. So being no further comment, I will put the resolution that we recommend recommendations 1 to 4. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those against will say no. No abstentions, that's carried. You can stay there, Susie, because you're up again. This time on another decision, item 7, the 21-22 carry forwards. That's on page 13 of your agenda. And I wonder whether you can walk us through that document, a comprehensive and very detailed one. Can you help us out with what you're trying to achieve there?
Not a problem. So carry forwards is a term used in councils to carry forward unspent budget, where due to various reasons that money hasn't been spent, primarily resourcing capacity, finalising contract, etc. So this process allows our business units to carry forward unspent budget. Now, I do want to remind you that LGA does not have, this is not a defined term in the LGA, carry forwards. So the LGA requires you as a council to act prudently, to manage expenses, etc., and to manage a balanced budget, okay? So carry forwards in terms of your accountability is to manage our budget in a prudent manner. I will highlight, so carry forwards, and the key is on page 14 and page 15. So if you go to the table on page 14, this is a summary of what we're proposing in terms of carry forwards. So we've broken it down between our OPEX and our CAPEX. The interim net variance column is a total of what has been underspent at a budget level for the year in terms of those high level categories. The next column is what we propose to carry forward in the following 12 months. So finance have worked with the individual corporate managers of these buckets to confirm what we can expect to spend in the next 12 months. And we are also putting out to a further required in out years, a further amount we will want to spend. But in the next 12 months, we are just carrying forward the 22-23, but we also expect to spend some in the following years. So today, the ask at a breaking down level, the ask is to carry forward $4 million or $4,032 into 22-23, with $2,190 carry forward into further years. Now, the important table, I guess, to look at as well is on page 15, where we've broken those numbers down as to where that funding is currently sitting and where we propose to take that from. So those two tables are the important ones, as well as the detail. I will highlight, though, the table on page 14, as Councillor Curtin pointed out earlier. In some instances, you may have a budget, the first line, 26 million was not spent, but we're asking, 26,000. And we're asking to carry forward 100,000. That is because at a total level, asset management at a total level had 26 or wanted to carry forward 26, but at the macro level, we need 100 to spend. But actually in the thick of things, paragraph 11 explains in totality, this will wash up.
This will wash up.
Yes, and this will balance in the wash up. So of the total availability, we can still seek that, but still balance our books.
So we've still got an underspend for asset management overall. So one line item going up because there's a business need to do it. And in the normal course of events, we would overspend and underspend within the totality of the schemes in any given year because the activity is lumpy. So and there are sufficient reserves. So
Are the reserves pursuant to the same line item? So no one's asking to spend extra money here.
correct.
It's just the cheque's going to be written a bit further out, but it still doesn't quite answer the 74K question. Absolutely appreciate it's going to come out in the wash somewhere.
Yep.
But can you explain it a bit more?
So
36,000 or 400,000.
Chris is here. So there's
I'm happy to explain. So you're right. So asset management is a summary. We've got 25 schemes and a raft of other cost elements. So across the board, the position is 26K underspent. Each of the targeted rate schemes also hold a operating reserve, and that covers unders and overs. So if we weren't specifically asking for a carry forward for macro, the funds, the targeted rate portion of the funds would be carried forward anyway into the operating reserve. But what we lose is the general rate component. With macro, there's a specific task, desilting a detention dam that was unable to be carried out this year, and we're carrying that out next year. So we wanted to carry forward the full amount. So the macro scheme is underspent, but asset management as a whole is less underspent. So we're dealing with a specific case because it is very cost sensitive to the community, and we want to carry forward all of the funds that we had set aside rather than just carry forward the target rate component into the operating reserve, which can be used at a later date. So I hope that helps.
It's a little confusing, Chris, but we'll come back to it. We'll get there eventually. Sorry, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. And look, and thank you for the paper and that explanation. Paragraph 11 totally befuddled me. And it's just because I'm not laying any blame for that. I was just finding it very difficult to unpack. I may come back to it. I just have a number of specific questions centred around the concern that we don't seem to be carrying forward a lot of what we said we would do in the long-term plan, particularly around CapEx. There's like 18 million underspend and we're only carrying forward, say, 9 million. You know, what's happening to the rest? Are we abandoning stuff that we said we would do? Is where my questions are coming from, but some of them are a little more targeted than that. For example, to illustrate the point, this isn't my question, but just so you understand, in integrated catchment management, we had 4 million interim net variance, 4 million, yes, and we're only carrying forward 1 million, and so I thought to myself, well, what aren't we doing that was worth 2.6 million in terms of integrated catchment management?
So on that, and Ian had to go to Wellington, so he's not here to talk to it, but there the decision has been made not to carry forward underspends that are not committed under the erosion control scheme.
Like debt we haven't incurred, in other words.
Correct. So it's not revenue that we've brought in and we're not spending. It's just debt we haven't incurred.
Yeah.
In terms of whether we will still deliver the work, you might recall that the erosion control scheme is a 30-year scheme, and there's there'll be a future choice when we come to the end of it about whether over the life of the whole scheme we've spent the full amount that we intended to spend, and whether or not you want to keep going for longer, so 30 years might turn to 33 years, and you spend the full amount. Sorry, I'm conflating things here, the 30 million over 10 years, whether you want to lengthen the scheme and spend the same amount, or whether or not you want to drop dead at the end of the 10-year period and do something new and have an overall underspend. In terms of delivery of the activity, it is demand driven, and so the view by the team delivering the program is that it becomes a little bit of a nonsense just carrying forward underspends year after year and actually making the job for them next year even harder, because their 3 million turns into 5 million and on it goes. So rather than do that and assume that we're going to spend money that we can't, they're just recalibrating based on the demand that they're seeing.
All right.
And to your more general question, what we've done with this exercise probably more in a more disciplined fashion than previous years is we've gone and asked really hard questions about the doability of delivery based on previous conversations with council in recent months. And so what we've put forward for carry forwards is based on, one, what we believe we can deliver with some confidence, and two, what we know that we need to deliver for the levels of service that are promised in the long-term plan. So we're not telling you that there's any level of service that cannot be delivered, but there will be some rephasing, and some of that capital is being transferred in the next year if these requests are approved. But as Susie and Chris pointed out before, there's also some in out years being pushed further along, because our CapEx profile is not a one-year profile, it runs right through.
All right, and so if we were I can understand the debt not incurred for the SES, but if we were to take Hiratonga Plains flood control scheme, the underspend's 1.5 million, the carry forward's 700K. Are you telling me we're not abandoning $800,000 worth of capital work on a flood control scheme that needed to be done?
No, Chris can speak.
No, so we're simply reprofiling it, looking at what our capacity is to spend capital next year, and only carrying forward what we believe is a reasonable stretch target.
So what happened? So you're only carrying forward what you think you can use next year or spend next year.
That's right, and we're pushing, so we're reprofiling the program, so we push some out beyond that.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So it's still on the books, it's just in a later date.
It's still
Correct.
on the books, it's just at a later date.
All right.
And look, I'll just make the other observation. When we designed the upgrade of the flood schemes, that was done at reasonable pace to meet an opportunity from government to co-fund, in the context of COVID recovery, a big flood scheme upgrade, and there were some pretty round numbers, 20 million from the Crown, 10 million from us, And of course, as we go digging, we're finding things, and there's been weather issues. And so, I mean, over the life of a program that size, to with any absolute precision to be able to guess what the total cost to deliver the job will be is nigh on impossible. But as we get closer to the end of it, we'll make decisions about recalibration. If there's further borrowing required to complete it, then we'll be back at the table. If there's less borrowing required because it cost less than we assumed, then we'll just borrow less.
Right, so still the overall program of work's got different lumps along the way. Just two more examples, I think. Just a little bit troubled by the Clive River dredging. I know what's happened to the consent there. And we've got $1 million CapEx work stream, paragraph 76. We're only carrying forward 100K. I assume that means we're simply not rating for the other 1 million, or not borrowing for the other 1 million. Have we still earmarked in our long-term plan what we might need to do for a land disposal option on that project? What's the consequences of that carry forward decision?
Yeah.
So
we working now? I don't know your mic.
Yep. So it's working now. So we have indicated in the LTP land-based disposal in 2030. So there's an increased funding pool being put together. In terms of the carryover, that was around the organising activity, the preliminaries to the works. What we intend to come back to council with probably early in the new triennium, around November, December, is what the options are for Clive dredging, what the costs are, and what the options are to fund. So we'll effectively be asking to bring forward some of that funding because the funds that we have for ocean-based disposal are very likely to be insufficient to cover the land-based disposal. So we're coming back to council November, December, outlining the options, the opportunities to fund those options for a decision whether we bring capital forward or what we do to fund the work.
And that would likely involve some borrowing. You effectively agreed in the last long-term plan to pre-fund that. Works in 2030, start accumulating it now by an increased rate. One of the options is that we bring forward the activity to get the river dredged once we've got the consents and things secured, but before we've collected the rate, but we can borrow and then pay back afterwards. So it's just changing the order of the transaction.
My last question is really around the staff salary one, staff remuneration. Executive team seeks to carry forward 729,000 of unspent general funds, whereas most of the carry forwards seem to be from a cost centre, and it's a time shuffle within the cost centre. I got the impression from this that we were from some sort of general rate, money, that might have been taken for a specific purpose in our long-term plan, reallocating, gathering it together to fund, for the good reasons explained, additional staff remuneration. Can we do that?
So the funding's not coming from, so when we say general funds, what we mean by that is it's not coming from reserves. It is coming from funding that does relate to activity, because all funding does. It's not just out of the corporate service overhead, but it's not tagged.
So we've got some untagged general rate revenue sitting.
No. I think, Councillor, it's already approved budget which was underspent in the previous year, and it's sitting there in a line item. I can't identify the exact line, but it'll be there somewhere, and we're looking to carry that forward. It'll be a staff remuneration or
So all the activity that's funded by council has a component, apart from the stuff that goes to third parties externally, but for the council's activity has a staff remuneration salary component to the delivery of it. And so you can look at the accounts either through the activities, or you can look at it through a slice of staffing costs.
I see.
What we're saying is that across all of our activity, there was an underspend in total staff costs, and what we're proposing to carry forward is that as a proportion of that underspend, but not anything that is tagged to reserves, for example.
Or to other
Yeah.
purposes than staff remuneration.
That's right. So we're not dipping into, say, a targeted rate-funded flood scheme that ratepayers have paid for a specific outcome on. That will continue to fall to the reserves.
Thank you, Chair.
It's a good line of questioning, Councillor, and goes to, if you like, the probity of spending an approved budget versus some other nefarious revenue source.
Thank you.
That's
Revenue source.
well, unknown revenue source, perhaps be a better way of describing it.
Yeah, none of
Well,
those.
time for those questions to be asked.
Sound like criminal act.
Councillor, you had some questions.
Yeah, well, Councillor Williams has probably just about asked every question there is, so mine might have been half answered.
It's a dig at you, man.
And amongst all that, but just to be more specific, I'll ask them anyway. So my first question is, I can't see in there that the cost associated with not, I guess, achieving what we set out to do in the year and before we go and carry forward. So perhaps to give you an example, is like the regional water security. So we want to carry forward some monies there. We obviously haven't achieved what we set out to do on that budget line. But is it a simple case of just shuffling those funds to the next year without costs being incurred because we employ specific members in that team? And so are they still sitting there, costing us money in the year that we didn't achieve anything? And so, as we go year by year, if we didn't achieve anything and kept carrying forward, our budget line would be diminishing over time because of that. Is that a fair assessment?
We've been eating into the allocation and will continue to do so with the costs that we are incurring, some of which are co-funded from the Crown and some of which are council funded. From memory, at this early phase, council decided to general rate fund its contribution to this exercise. And so what we're saying is that, because it's the capital component we're asking for the carry forward, what we're saying is that in relation to the capital component of the activity, because the budget was a combination of operating and capital, that's the part that is underspent and will carry forward. We obviously haven't been able to submit receipts to the Crown for their co-contribution yet, and we haven't borrowed for our contribution to deliver that piece of work because the work hasn't been done. Think of the various water storage possibilities that we've been exploring. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess I was assuming that any spend was capital within that budget line, but you're saying no, there's some operational and some capital.
So that's my recollection, although I could be wrong on that. Is the whole thing capitalised? No, Tim's saying it's
okay.
Yeah,
that's great.
So there are costs that we can legitimately capitalise in relation to an actual project, and as we get closer to project execution, obviously things like the feasibility studies, the seismic work that's been done, we could capitalise to the project itself. The work that Tom does, for example, with the team around the wider community engagement is unlikely, and the wider investigations, until we've got a scheme, won't be able to be capitalised.
All right, look, I'm just conscious of wanting to move on, but the line of questioning is spot on. If you felt some hesitancy in asking the question, you're not alone in being rather in the dark about what's going on here. And Councillor Tate has made an excellent suggestion that we have a bit of a workshop for those that really want to be come to tears with this.
Come to Jesus.
Come to Jesus with it. And to go through in some detail, because it really does take some effort to get there. I had two uncertainties around this paper. One, it's the most carry forward I've ever seen, and it begs a couple of questions. The first was, and I'm pleased to have had a conversation with Susie Pryor, is a technical one, to say, are we in any way ultra vires of the LGA in taking the steps we are? The mechanics of I said, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul internally, is that okay? And the answer I have is yes, it is. We're on reasonable grounds there, because what we've had, if you track through, is an item of expenditure approved, a line item, and then we've got an example where that particular item is exceeded in the carry forward. So, what's going on there? It's a legitimate question, and the question is, can you borrow it from somewhere else? That we needed to know that that's an okay practice. So there was that technical aspect, and then the subsequent questions from Councillor Foley and Councillor Williams touch on a very important other strategic element, which I think we need to work harder on, and that is when we have such large quantums of underspend, for example, in asset management, where it's 57% CapEx underspend, do we have either a budgeting problem or do we have a service delivery problem? And are we compounding that problem by pushing out to out years? And is there capacity to deliver in those out years? And I think we need to have a bigger conversation and reset, if that's the term to use, to get it back onto a more even keel. My instinct says we are inviting further difficulty by continuing to push out without a reflection on our capacity to deliver. So we will set up a workshop-style discussion with Craig and any invitees that want to attend and go through some of that detail. I think it's compounded also by the revenue side, and we'll need there's a touch base on this with the HBRIC paper and the financial report, because I'm certain that we will have equal strategic decisions to be made on the revenue, and we need to come to a clear understanding of what's going on and make some positive decisions. So that's the little speech from the throne on that one.
Chair, can I make a couple
Sure.
of comments on it? Look, you're right. You've seen many carry forwards before, because every single year we have a carry forwards paper. This is larger than normal, and every council that I'm in touch with around the country is asking for carry forwards larger than normal. 3 reasons for that. The first of which is obviously COVID disruption, which has disrupted a lot of work around the country, particularly capital projects. The second is that regional councils generally, and this one in particular, have embarked on an incredibly ambitious ramp-up program of both operating and capital expenditure precisely at the wrong time with respect to COVID disruption and then all of the associated market conditions. And then the third dynamic in this is the fact that significant parts of what we have in here relate to Jobs for Nature or the IRG projects, where at great pace, and this goes to your question about whether the issue is in our budgeting and forecasting, at great pace proposals were brought together and assumptions that we were going to be in a time of very low unemployment, very high unemployment, and lots of surplus capacity in the community, and probably some optimism about how quickly COVID would pass, and some optimism about how easily we could acquire the resources to execute. So it's fairly standard, obviously, in year one, after year one of an LTP, to have larger carry forwards, because typically you make optimistic assumptions about new programs and projects, and then you find it's harder to get away. So that's kind of normal. And then it's compounded by COVID, then it's compounded by our ambition, then it's compounded by our co-funding. So we've had a perfect storm this year, and look, hopefully we did foreshadow the situation to you in recent months leading up to this, that A, these dynamic factors were underway, and B, that this size of carry forwards that was coming forward. What we have done, though, just to reiterate, is we have gone back and examined the deliverability over the next 12 months, and then looked at what needs to go into the 12 months after that, and not asked for carry forwards in one particular area, and some smaller areas as well, where we simply just don't believe that we will be able to deliver. So, yeah, I think overall you can have confidence that that there hasn't been some systemic issue with, poor budgeting, poor planning here, or a systemic issue around delivery, notwithstanding the fact that we continue to struggle to recruit some staff in key areas where capital expenditure is being undertaken.
Thanks, James. I don't think there was an intent to be an inquisition, except that it is what it is. How do we best deal with that? And I'm going to call Councillor Foss, unless you had a question.
I was going to move the paper.
Councillor Foss move, second to Councillor Barker. You want to speak to that?
Just a quick comment. Thanks very much, particularly the last, your explanation there, James. That was very helpful. At the end of the day, I look forward to the workshop with the ideas, just to have a look at this. It's just gaining understanding and confidence, because the brutal question is actually, for many, many reasons, as you've described, we haven't spent $13.351 million of what we thought we were going to. So when we go through another reprioritisation or have another look at our annual plan and LTP, the question is, do we still want to prioritise whatever those items are? It sounds like you've already done a bit of triaging there, which would be interesting to have that discussion at some stage as well. Particularly, I understand, the OPEX stuff and the Crown funding, et cetera, I do struggle with the carrying over underspend of OPEX, but more than happy to be convinced on that one, because at the end of the day, we're chewing reserve funds, that's what they're for, but we're also borrowing to fund some of this stuff. So just some hard questions I think we should ask of ourselves. But having said that, thanks very much for the paper, the explanations, and your explanation too, James, and happy to move.
Yeah, Councillor.
I think the key question here is not the quantum or the size of the carry forwards, but the merits of it. I just want to focus on one point, is that for about 20 or 30 years, this council spent next to nothing on stop banks. We've got a really big program of checking on our stop banks, examine them, restructuring, rebuilding. This is an activity we haven't done for 20, 30 years. So with that in mind, you would expect this is going to be bigger numbers. They're expensive things to do. The other problem is we haven't been able to complete the work in a timely manner. And I would say to councillors, the key thing for considering this is not the quantum, but the merits of it. And I'd first by making an observation that a number of councillors around the country are now really worried about the quality of their stop banks. And some of them are only starting to think about doing X-ray work, investigative work and geotechnical work about the capability of the stop banks to cope under pressure. Well, I felt pretty gratified about the fact that we had done that work already, and we're about pulling stop banks apart, pulling them, rebuilding them and making them stronger. So this is a key function we've got, and I just think again that the work we're doing here is meritorious, no question about that. So let's get focused on the money, because quite often that's what people do, is see the big numbers. The key test here for me is the merit of the work. And the stuff that I see here, I think it deserves being carried forward. I'm very happy to second it.
Councillor.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I totally understand everything that the CEO has just shared with us. It's not that we haven't had some forewarning of this. Well, I think what had changed from the previous papers is that they had foreshadowed an indicative carry forward of 17 million, which is roughly the underspend. What was different in this paper was that the number's 9 on 17, and so we were leaving 8 million behind, and I was just wanting to test why we were doing that and to ensure that it didn't have consequences for levels of service that we had promised our communities we would deliver. With those assurances received, it's a matter of timing. I'm happy to obviously support the recommendations.
Any other comments? Kitty, any comment?
No, I'd really welcome a workshop. Being my first hui here, and the amount of information that was in here is quite different from what I look at through the investment committees and things. So yeah, a bit of learning and education around that would be great for me.
All right, you've any other discussion, Craig?
I'll move, been seconded.
Yeah. Okay.
Good, thanks.
I'll put the recommendation to, what is the recommendation? To approve the carry forward, or recommend to council the approval of the carry forward. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. That's carried. Still in the hot seat there, Susie, for item 8?
Item 8, I'm actually going to get Chris Comer, the CFO, to talk to this paper.
we'll take the paper as read. Obviously the operating deficit is looking at about 2.8 million compared to a surplus we're forecast at 4 million. Principal reason behind this is around the investment income, which is quite a lot, 7 million versus 21 million, for the obvious reasons around COVID-19 impacts and the political and economic situation around the world. It's gone through there. We have had some underspends on our operating expenditure and our capital expenditure, as we've just gone through in terms of our carry forwards. So therefore, overall, in terms of our requirement to borrow, so the investment income being a lot lower than we had predicted, because we've had that other underspends in the OPEX and the CAPEX, we haven't needed to borrow as much as we had forecast to, so we're still quite well within our limits of borrowing in there. And just a final comment that, as we've sort of mentioned in the carry forwards paper, that obviously in our next year's annual plan, we're going to have to do quite a bit of rephasing, re-looking at some of those projects as to where they actually hit in the future years, and obviously into the next LPP as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Committee, are there any questions around the paper? It's a very extensive and interesting paper. No questions there? Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Just paragraph 24 on the managed funds, you talk about budgeted line of 2.3 being capital growth to protect the fund value. Because the funds have decreased so much, are we going to take quite a reversal in value before we start withdrawing again? Is it, or does it reset?
What does that, sorry, what does that mean, Sarah Will? Will the fund rebalance back to original levels before we?
No, so obviously our strategy is to receive a certain amount of income from the returns that they make during the year, but also leave a certain amount in there to protect the capital growth and increase. So it's done obviously the opposite in the last 12 months. So are we going to have to wait for quite a significant turnaround to get back to where it was in terms of preserving that capital growth before we start withdrawing again?
Tim, so we calculated based on the inception of the funds going into the managed fund portfolio. So build-ups that we've had in previous years have obviously given us a capital buffer in there. I think this decrease has just brought us just down to not being within our having the protected growth in there. So there will need to be a little bit more put into the protective growth in the next couple of years before we could actually start, before we could. So we'll have to utilise more to put into the protected growth than we'll be able to utilise to put into rates.
The short answer is yes, and it's not. There's another element to this, which is not just the retention of earnings in the fund to maintain the real value. The 2% which had been planned, and that was always going to be a proxy for inflation that will go up and down over time. So it was a long run average assumption, and at the time that those decisions were made, we had a different view about inflation, which seemed to have been sort of solved globally. But there was also the income equalisation reserve fund that had been intended to be created. So in the long run, if our funds had performed or our overall investment portfolio had performed better than our requirements in any given year, the idea was to squirrel away that headroom so that in the sorts of years which we would expect, where there was a global financial crisis or some major market downturn, that we would be able to draw upon that to supplement our investment income. That's never been achieved. That was set about when this new investment framework was established, and of course the pandemic and the associated impacts of that came hot on the heels of just setting up the new framework. So it will take quite some time before our investments overall return to their value of which they were at inception. And we've made up for the inflation adjustment through that period and have any sort of buffer in which to create an income equalisation reserve. So yeah, there's a long way to go.
All right. That's a useful drop-in point, I think, Councillor Foley, is that table at paragraph 20, 21, 22, page 28, and paragraph 23 actually helps to identify where that shortfall lies. And the breakdown, thank you for that breakdown, it's very useful. If you go to 23.4, you'll see the investment income is a composite of actual cash coming in the door, interest, etc., but also non-cash items that are sitting there reflecting a drop in value of that managed fund asset. So that I think the question that sits around that number is, one, it didn't return what we thought it would, so therefore we create this sort of major hole in the accounts, not only from revenue side but also from the balance sheet. But also begs a question as to, and we've touched on that, is the retention of value of that. Do we take active steps to increase the value? And possibly the answer is not, that we need to take a hit and look to the future to replenish. But potentially we could go in and borrow and buy is another way of preserving that asset. So the point I think would be useful in the workshop is to come up with the options to say, here are some strategies, which are the ones that we want to get into and bring to the table for consideration. Having said that, I think because of the happy or unhappy confluence of underspend, the likelihood of continued underspending, and the revenue decline, our cash flow position is not markedly adverse. So we can look forward to, we've got space to move, I would suggest. Is that a fair assumption, Susie, from your perspective?
Accurate, that's a fair assumption.
I think, look, the settings that are in the revenue and financing policy and our investment strategy signed off by council in the last LTP and in the creation of these longer term funds was premised on being a long-term investor. They are reasonably conservative settings, and the idea was that we'd take a long view, and there'd be good years and there'd be bad years. And so, I've been reflecting lately on time when I was the chair of the Eastern Central Community Trust in the middle of the global financial crisis, and we had $140 million in managed funds, and we lost about 40 million. But we didn't take any rash action. We just stuck with the policies, including a fairly comprehensive hedging policy, and everything eventually came back right, and the markets came back round, and it was sort of holding your nerve. But at the time, it was tempting to start panicking. But if you're a long-term investor, which this council has decided at this point to be, that you just have to ride the market out.
Thank you for that, James. Any other issues that you want to table at this point? Otherwise, we'll take
Can I just make a bit of a comment in response to that? And it obviously won't be today, but I'd like to test that, James, or certainly ask that question. Are we as council a long-term investor in managed funds, or are we expecting a reliable dividend year in, year out that offsets our rates and helps keep our ratepayers' bills down lower than they would be otherwise? I think there's two distinct strategies there, and I'd just like to test that one day.
Councillor Barker.
I think in response to Councillor Foley, I think there's another, what I think is a really important aspect here, is that you are guardians of the ratepayers' assets. And I think you have to have a responsibility to protect the assets over time. I've seen a number of organisations which have used their assets to spend on current consumption, and so therefore the asset value runs down. And I regard that as intergenerational theft. We've got something we need to hand it on. So my view of council is it's got an asset, it needs to preserve it. I think that previously we have squandered, this council has squandered on a number of occasions, value in the short term for decisions and have not protected the assets. It was given an enormously valuable gift of the lands thrown up by the earthquake, and you would struggle in many ways to go and see where these are represented today on our balance sheet. A lot of money has gone, and so I think the key thing for me in this is, are we preserving value? Are we growing it? So whatever assets we have, whatever the rate of inflation is, we should at the end of each year have as much in capital as we have, and then after that, squeeze as much as we can for revenue output. It's got to be a long-term view of preserving the asset to hand on to subsequent generations.
Councillor Barker's only talking about the council of the last century, of course. Are there any?
Chair, can I just quick comment?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'll just pick up on Will's, Councillor Foley's point there. I think it's timely that we just have a look at our entire organisation as us being the parent from the investment point of view. Because, you know, we look at inflation is mentioned often in there, and the costs of everything we're doing is going up. But we actually have some assets in there which perform well in high inflation. So it's looking from that lens, as custodians, as Rick's pointed out, of a large capital base, which we've kind of inherited, if you like. And the key questions to me are the philosophy in and around that and our intentions over time, and asking ourselves hard questions in a tough environment, challenging ourselves, because we actually do have written agreements and in our LTP, for example, with HBRIC, its asset base intentions in 2030, which are a long way from where they are now. And so do we have the right competency, the right resources, etc., in there, an ethos to develop that, to build the base, to help to continue to essentially subsidise rates. So look forward to that discussion. I think we've got quite a few discussions on this one and the previous item, just to have a look at everything again in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foley, you wanting to move this recommendation to receive a report?
Happy to move, Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Taylor. You want to speak, Councillor?
Which one? Sorry. Who was
Either
speaking
or.
You go.
You go first.
No, I'm fine.
Pretty much everything has been said, but I really do agree with what Councillor Foss said, that you really do need a vigorous discussion around your investment strategy, which we discussed recently at the FARS, and you know, what do we actually want to do with that investment, if we want to take any income off it, or we just want to keep capital growth. So, yeah, I think a workshop is absolute necessity. There's a lot to be discussed, and I'm pretty sure most of these councillors will be going into the next training. And I think that it would be really important that everyone has a very good understanding of the finances and the investments of the organisation, because big decisions need to be made next year.
Thank you, Councillor. That's well commented. Any other comment from anyone? Look, just to thank the team, Chris, Tim, Susie. A lot of work in this paper, and a lot more even in the paper before, and you've brought it all together. A lot of moving parts. So thank you for the diligence on this issue. That can't have been an easy ride pulling that together. So thank you so much for that. And just finally, the appetite is clearly around the table to develop our greater understanding of that, and be good to do that together with you, Susie. So let's do this soon, and gain that understanding. So thank you, and thank you, Councillor Taylor. You're about to depart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, and I'll take it for the children.
I'll put the record before you leave.
I'll do my best to call in. I'm sure we've got a Zoom link.
I'll put the recommendation, and you can at least vote on that. So all those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. Thank you. That's carried, and you may depart.
When we say workshop soon, do we mean before the election?
I think we'll have some discussion that will come and settle in.
I'd say you're going to struggle even before the election.
Could be, yeah.
the best after the election, you know, then you've got there.
We'll see how we go.
Yeah.
Look, thank you for that. We'll now move to, so that's the item 8, the financial report for the quarter, April to June, and then we'll consolidate that up for our annual report over the next little bit. What's your timing on that process? When is your report due for completion, Chris?
For the final financial statements. So our audit is coming through on the start of October. So we'd hopefully have, I'm not sure of the exact council meeting that we'll be coming to. We have to sign off in November by the 30th of November.
So you'll have a draft seal?
Draft's October, sign off in November.
Yep, okay. So that'll be in the new training. Is there any activity prior to the 8th of October?
I had thought we were going to have a FARS meeting on but maybe not on the draft financials.
Can
We've
I
got
come-
non-financial stuff to
No, okay,
today,
sorry,
but-
non-financial.
Can we come back to you on that date?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, thank you so much for that. That's good. Let's move to the other leg of the stool, three-legged stool, four-legged stool, and we've got
You all right? Do you want me to-
Tom,
highly regarded Tom Skirman
should have a drum roll.
Give us some names.
grace us today as he's taken his time out from his busy schedule to be here.
Yeah, a bit nervous about
We've
what
got a
we're seeing.
paper
Water security.
table, Tom, and that's item 9, page 33, the HBREC quarterly update, and you might want to link it to the previous paper if you can.
Yes, so thanks, Chair. It's the first time I've been introduced as a stool, so happy to be here. So firstly, look, apologies on behalf of Dan Druzianic, the Chair of HBREC, who couldn't be here today, had a clash, a board meeting clash. And also just to point out that we're in a transition phase in terms of normally Kishan, who was here, would have presented, but we're working with the HBRC team and PwC just to manage that, the management of the financial accounts and things like that on the way through. So you've got me today, and so just in terms of, like, you should never hand a lawyer a calculator. 15.2. It says operating expenses of 236 in the paper. That should say 670, 670,000, and that's how you'll end up with the maths of the 1.8 million. So, I'll just look. I'll dive in. I'll take the paper as read. I know you're under time pressure. I think helpfully, recently there was a request from council to have a forward-looking aspect of this paper as opposed to a backward-looking paper, and I think to your point, Chair, in terms of the forward-looking part of this conversation, best to focus on there. So I'm happy to take any questions in terms of the backward-looking stuff, but just in terms of the forward-looking stuff, look, Napier Port released its 9-month results on a conference call this morning. So on all the bullet points for the Napier Port, which are all sort of, 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, 12.4 are all arrows pointing down. As of the report today, all those arrows are pointing back up again, and so they've reported on a good quarter. And so I suppose the key thing for this table is that they are standing by their guidance of the 38 of a return of 38 to 42 million. Then what I also have pointed out in here is just to make a reference that to the end of June was showing that the assets of HBREC were down in the order of 72 million. The net assets, mostly from port value and managed funds value, and in the interim between then and back, there's probably been in the order of $42 million worth of recovery in those assets, which I think speaks to the current volatility of the market. And I think the comment that James made earlier around, markets will do what they will do. And so just to finally point out, which again I think goes to the comments that were made earlier, is that HBREC will be having a cash flow negative year in terms of its expenses will exceed its revenues in relation to the council's dividend, but again, consistent with the earlier comments, the managed funds have performed well. There has been a degree of, HBRIC does have a strategy around income equalisation and reserving. It has done that. There are reserves that can support the payment of the council dividend this year, and still retaining within our capital protection guidelines. And so those are the comments. I think if there's any questions around Food East, I think they're probably best directed to Craig, and just happy to take any questions.
I'll call upon Councillor Barker to give a little bit of a view of the performance, particularly paragraph 3, in regard to the long-term performance of investment funding, and then I'll ask Councillor Foss to just give a brief update on Food East.
Well, it's always difficult to get the perfect investment where you get massive capital gain as well as very high return on your investment. These are always challenging times. But what I can say about the position that HBRC has found itself in is that starting some time ago, we had a look at, as an organisation, about the management of our capital and the growth of our capital assets. And it led on to a partial float of the port, and therefore the money coming out that's now been invested in long-term funds. It was done to be conservative, yet to have an eye for the future. So there's no sense at all that all this money needs to be locked up in those funds. But there was a real strong belief that we had to do the best to preserve the value of the assets that we had, rather than see them drop backwards. We are in difficult times. The port of Napier is subject to fluctuations in trade, and the global supply chains crisis has affected Napier Port. I think it was when the port company was here, they showed a graph of how erratic the ship visits have been. These are erratic all over the world. There's a shortage of containers, a shortage of this. It has been a really difficult time. We've had no visits from cruise ships, which has also hit our income, the port's income stream. So it's been challenging. On the other side of it, we've had problems with the world. There's been a global problem with equities, and interest rates until recently have been at historic lows. Hundreds of years since we've seen interest rates at the rate they are. So putting your money in the piggy bank, the ASB or the BNZ, just hasn't been a particularly good option either. Having said that, I'm sure we will get through this. I think it's the council's in a good position with HBRIC, and shortly to be renamed. And if we're looking to follow the model, I think the Quayside, which was being developed by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, is a very good model. We've seen recently how much their investments provide for their income, which is quite a staggering amount, and to be able to do that as well as grow their asset base. I think that's the model that we should be looking to. And I do think there is an opportunity for this council to strengthen its relationship with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and for HBRIC to strengthen its relationship with Quayside to our mutual benefit. I think this is the future for this council. This council is going to be expected to provide better services in the future, with more challenges with climate change, and yet on the other side of it, be miserly in the amount it takes from ratepayers for rates. So it's going to bridge the gap. It needs an alternative source of income, and that's where HBRIC or its successor comes into effect. But it's going to take some careful management and shrewd management. But also, I think the underlying thing is it's got to have a long-term strategy. It's not something that will be done day by day. People have to be thinking in 10, 20, 30 years when they're making these decisions. So, to date, I think we've made a very good start.
Thank you, Councillor. Well done. Councillor Foss.
Just briefly, Food East, which is HBRIC's only active investment, is progressing well given the circumstances. One update to the paras 9 and 10 there is we actually do now have a resource consent. Final design is underway right now, so we can plan to tender out for earthworks quite soon. So we may may have been able to bring the project to fruition a bit earlier, the physical project a bit earlier than currently outlined, but that's of course subject to vagaries of the construction market and some other consenting issues. But a couple of exciting developments there. In addition to what you see there is a very, very strong appetite from agencies of the Crown to have a structure such as Food East to channel other funds through with some of their aspirations of investment in things, food and innovation, particularly across larger Hawke's Bay area, and also a conduit for various post-settlement organisations if they choose to partner up, to leverage up in and around our area and around our region. The underlying asset of Food East, which is the land at the moment, has increased quite substantially in value. So there is a bit of a safety buffer or net there if we require it as we engage with our major shareholder, HBRIC. But of course, we have very strong relationships with our shareholders and supporters, Hastings District Council, Progressive Meats Limited, and Kanoa, who, from the government, the new PGF, they are very, very, very keen for this thing to be up and running and ready. They have a lot of aspirations for the space.
Great, thanks, Councillor, and thanks for the efforts in pursuing Food East with great gusto and vigour. So, are there any other questions of Tom or comments on the HBRIC report? Councillor Foley?
Yeah, if there's no one else. Look, just referring to Councillor Barker's comments there, and particularly on the Napier Port, I thought interesting that, you know, everything that could be thrown at it in the last few years has been thrown at it, and it's still standing, and it's still performing, and still providing us with a dividend. So I think that's quite illustrative. And I'd, I would ask or test the HBRIC board, you know, with the other assets we have in our portfolio, you know, can they be doing something similar, better? And, you know, as an example, you know, what other investments could we be looking at within the Hawke's Bay region? One that provides us with wealth preservation and growth. So you look at what land prices have done around here in the last 20 years, pretty significant and strong growth. Around commercial returns and something that could provide us with alternate land use testing, if you like, and finally provide, you know, environmental benefits and gains from either the location or the kind of trial or testing work that it can do. So yeah, I just see I guess some alternative strategies that I would like to put to the HBRIC board.
Excellent questions, thank you. Councillor Williams?
I just really wanted to endorse what Councillor Foley has just shared. If I am lucky enough to be elected in the next term, I will be encouraging, inviting, welcoming one of those, all of them, a discussion around our overall investment strategy, including through HBRIC and the way that we optimise returns to this region socially and economically and environmentally across our overall asset base. And I think HBRIC is an ideal vehicle to ensure that what our aspirations are delivered in a way that we can control, perhaps more so than we can by simply having the amount of money that we do currently in managed funds.
That's a fair point.
Thank you. Councillor Van Bay? Look, I think we've had a reasonable conversation with that, and obviously more to come. And I'm picking up sensing an appetite to engage pretty solidly on this. Those that are already going to be returned can pick up that mantle and run forward should the rest of us fall by the wayside. So can I have a mover for that?
I'll move.
You see the report. Thank you, Councillor. Second, Councillor Foss. You've had your comments. Those in favour of...
What sort of chair is this about the standing orders?
Those in favour of receiving that report will say aye.
Aye.
Those that are against it will say no. The ayes have it.
If I were to say something, I'd say thank you, Tom, for good work.
Yeah, thanks,
I was
Tom.
denied the opportunity.
Thank you, committee. We'll now move on to the organisation performance. This is agenda item 10. The performance report, now a very important one. So we've got Sarah in front of us. Kia ora.
Kia ora, councillors and committee members. I've got two papers today. The first is the organisational performance report, which I can probably take that as read. I bring it every time. There aren't really any new things to add to this report.
Great.
But happy to take questions.
Perhaps just here to take questions, Chair. There hasn't been any inordinate change to what's being delivered, what's struggling to be delivered, how the organisation's going more generally in previous quarters. So not a huge amount there. We certainly have seen some good positive trends around the customer experience with the new CX team and the new capability we have around managing that, although the last week rates demand has gone out and we get an inordinate volume of both counter visits as well as phone calls. That's always challenging, but we've got a much better system for managing and tracking that than we've ever had before. So that's a high note, if you like. And I did just note and discuss with the manager of the communications team the fact that over the last few quarters we've seen a downward trend in website visits, social media views, and even media inquiries. It's been a little bit of a quieter period in terms of media engagement.
Thank you, James. Are there any questions of Sarah on that performance report? It's very, very clear, I find it. I find it really giving us a snapshot right across the board. And I was, following up on James's comment, very happy with the customer service outcome. And a shout out to reception staff at the front counter who do encounter all sorts of engagements which a lot of us just wouldn't tolerate. So well done to them. They do a sterling job out there. Craig, you've got a
Thanks. It's just a query or question to CE. If you'd comment, James, a bit further on the people and capability. It's been an ongoing issue for a while, turnover and vacancies, etc., which actually does link in with those underspends in a small way, I know. But if you could just any update or describe to that a bit further, because it's a substantial turnover and we seem to be getting by just with about 30-ish plus vacancies at any one time.
Yes, so I'm quietly optimistic that the next quarterly report you'll see will be an improving trend in terms of a reduction in turnover. Look, it is still proving to be incredibly challenging to recruit in some key technical areas, particularly around science and engineering, ICT. We are looking beyond the borders and hoping that the open borders and the return to more of an internationalised market for our staff will help us fill some of those vacancies. I think we have seen, we're seeing the tail end of the great resignation, if you like. So in terms of the resignation volume, there has been certainly less since this reporting period completed than was in this period here. So I think things will stabilise. But having said that, there's still a lot of capacity there's still a lot of demand in the economy and limited capacity right across the board. And I think we'll continue to see high mobility of our staff based on opportunities. And that goes to the extent to which we are competitive, both on remuneration and the broader benefits of working. We're working hard on that.
Are you still seeing approaches from various Crown agencies for to some of our key staff, or in the sector at least, moving into RMA reform and things like that, or is that slowed down as well?
We're still seeing a fairly steady volume of those, and I convened a meeting last week of regional council CEOs and central government CEOs where we tabled this concern. And one idea that has been put on the table, which is being looked at in the Bay of Plenty, is an idea of a sort of an organisation without walls, where working on common areas of interest between Crown agencies and central and local government, that we look to have sort of staff not be pulled between different organisations, but work in common locations on common issues. And I think that's a huge opportunity for regional councils into the future, and also working with our iwi partners in such a way which is more collaborative and more agnostic as to which badge you're wearing. You're all working on the same issues for the same outcomes, but might be co-located, good for collaboration, etc., and reduce that, the poaching and pulling that goes on.
Thanks.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Just a very, what might be a seemingly minor in context question, Sarah. Just the public incidents under health, safety and wellbeing category. I'm just interested in, there were 3 public incidents in Q4, and that's pretty consistent. Can you just give me a characterisation of what might comprise a public incident in the context of that part of the report?
I've got an idea, James, but is that something that you might be able to? The public incidents are usually a confrontation with a member.
They are. So we've had a little spate lately, which will also fall into the next reporting area, reporting period, where we've got more presence on the ground with our rangers, and we're intervening a bit more around antisocial behaviour occurring in on our properties and in the public spaces. Having said that, we're also seeing just an uptick in broader community antagonism towards our staff, some of which has involved the intervention of the police. So some of it's a sign of the times, really. We did have a staff member's vehicle rammed by another vehicle recently. Police have been involved in that. So there is a general set of societal conditions going on. We're looking at various new tools, such as body cameras for our field-based staff, to ensure that we're providing them with more tools to protect themselves and collect evidence around those sorts of interactions.
Is this enforcement mostly where you're talking?
It's general staff, so it's staff working in public environments, particularly the rivers. The river spaces do attract a disproportionate number of people undertaking either illegal activities or antisocial activities. And whereas in the past we might have stayed away, with our new ranger presence, we've now got 2 rangers, of course, and then they get backed up by our compliance team as well. We tend to go and deal with those issues now, and obviously work with the police around that so we don't put staff in harm's way. But just our general staff working out in the regional parks and the rivers have experienced approaches and interactions which are growing and a bit new for us.
One more. Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question. It's something I definitely want to remain alive to, so thank you, James. There's reference to a business case development process under asset management regional water assessment. And it's just to get a sense of what the business case development process is in a regional water assessment demand reduction initiative context.
Tom's just through the
Just
door.
left. I didn't.
He'd be best placed to speak. Probably.
Come back in here, Tom.
Question for you, Tom. Regional water assessment business case development is referenced in the quarterly performance report.
Yes, what have you done about that?
There's reference to a business case development process in a regional water assessment and demand reduction initiative context. What does that involve, as opposed to a business case for some other?
Were you looking under the levels of service or under the activity reporting?
It's under
Levels of
page
service.
17, asset management, regional water assessment. We've nearly completed a program of engagements with territorial authorities to inform the business case development process under the regional water security program, or is it for the regional water security program?
Yeah, so this is effectively sort of, merging the lanes between that and additional funding that you set in for year 2 of the LTP to around, because water security is a function of supply and demand, and this is the demand side.
Right.
And look, and the funding, while generous, $1 million or just under $1 million is not going to, change that. So the process, so we've been through a series of interviews with territorial authorities and with major industrial water users, so we're leaving irrigators out of it because we know that irrigators are going to require, we don't need to go there to know that a lot of work needs to be done there. And what we, through Dan Bloomer, will bring to you is some recommendations around where do we think your best bang for the bucks are to save, and improve water conservation and efficiency through that, but not say, here's some money, do it. Say actually build some proper business cases for some really transformational changes through future long-term plans, because because they are going to be big issues.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm very glad I asked. So thank you.
My main recommendation is that
just follow up on that and say that as a matter of interest, I've been talking to a couple of Hastings District councillors who have been involved in discussions about this, and I'm actually surprised how focused they are on the problem and what the need is for them to act. So making good progress, Tom.
Yeah, we've had some great engagement.
Sorry to pull you in from out in the corridor.
No, I was hoping you would demand I'll be sacked.
Look, thank you for that. Obviously, some very substantial gems sitting in your report there that have brought that out. So well done on that. I think we'll quickly. Are there any other comments on that particular report? That's the organisational performance report.
I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you. And there's a seconder there with Councillor Williams.
Yeah.
All those in favour of receiving that report will say aye. Aye. Those against will say no, and that's carried. Subject to further comment if you want, Councillor. We'll move on to the second leg here of your contribution, Sarah, and that's item 11, the annual report, interim non-financial results. Again, another very illuminating report. Can you just quickly...
Yeah, very quick. I can go through. This is the non-financials is led by the strategy and performance team, but we do have a lot of collaboration with the comms team and also the Māori partnerships team to pull this part together as well. And the reason why we tabled it today, because there won't be another opportunity to present this before the draft plan goes to audit in October, because the final document, I understand, is coming to FARS in December. So this is our only opportunity to have our eyes on it. And the only other thing I'll say is just there's just been the additional challenges in pulling this together because it's the first year of the long-term plan. So there's been some new measures to look at and incorporate and measure. But aside from that, I would like to present the paper as read and answer any questions you may have.
So, committee, you will have seen that that report at your appendices at page 82. It says Part 3 community outcomes. So that goes into the final report. So by way of explanation, Part 3 is the non-financial reporting which goes into the annual report.
There's part 3 is our community outcomes, which are a strategic plan goals or objectives, and part 4 are our level of service measures. So there's actually 2 parts that you're looking at as a 6-part annual report.
So this particular paper refers to part 3 and part 4.
That's right.
Just for any feedback or questions? Yes. Any questions on that, what you've seen so far? And I know it's a lot. We've had a lot of that type of report today, but comments there. First report of the long-term plan progress. Happy to move. Thank you, Councillor. We've got a mover. Do you want to comment? Seconded by Councillor Barker.
Thank you for all the great work, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a very, very good report, well written. I like the colour schemes.
I'll do my best. We've got a great comms team that we draw on support from other people as well. So good collaboration.
Can I make one comment?
Councillor Williams.
I just wanted to say I've written wow twice on this, and that is to do with the 100% significant non-compliance or enforcement action was taken and 100% of resource consents processed within time. Wow.
Yeah, was it?
Well done, Katrina, as well.
So
with a team that have been down on staff as well for the year, so it's been quite some feat.
They work very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, major improvement over a couple of years on that, so well done, team. Any other comments or questions before we, we've moved, haven't we?
It moved and seconded, and I thought you put it, and now taking other comments. You're all over the shop.
We're on 3 o'clock.
That's your exit time.
I think he needs a cup of coffee. Get the chairman.
We've got the recommendation in front of all those in favour of receiving the report, say aye. Those against will say no, that's carried. We've got the final item this side of morning afternoon tea is discussion of minor items, and there are none. Oh, fine. I'm not looking.
The all-powerful class, we paid some 20 minutes speech written.
Sorry.
Volume 1.
You've got 30 seconds to deliver your FAR's report.
Thanks, Chair. You're so generous. One day I may look up to you.
I beg your pardon.
If I sit down.
You'll leave the room.
So yes, well, the report is, there, some of these items were already discussed here on our CS agenda. Just probably one point that may be of extra interest, things in and around the asset management group review and our internal audit plan. We had quite a discussion around that. What we did discover is there's many reviews, be it, they're not really audits, but reviews, etc., of delivery and service within the organisation, which we were not aware of. And obviously asset management being the biggest dollar item got our attention. We've had quite a discussion and a presentation from the CE and Chris Foley in and around that. And the only question we were left with is, that's fantastic, you've had all these reviews, really good that we've become aware of it, which we'll share with the larger council at a later date. How have they all been implemented? It's the only outstanding question. And I think it was the flavour of the committee that once we learn that they have been delivered upon as intended, or here's why they have not, that almost serves as an internal audit. So we await that, which gave us all a lot of confidence that things are moving on as we thought and predicted, but the reporting has been upgraded and improved, so there are really no questions left in that space. Other than that, I'll leave the paper there as read, Mr. Chair, unless there are further questions to it.
Matty, are there any questions arising?
I'll move the recommendations, Mr. Chair, if you want to cut to the chase.
I'll second that. Comment?
No, no further comment.
I'd like to hear some speeches in support of this to persuade me to vote in favour of the report.
Nothing to say.
You look thirsty, how's that?
I'll put the recommendation that we receive that report. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. That's carried. And as I was just, before I was rudely interrupted, the minor items, of which there are none, will now adjourn for afternoon tea.
You're interrupted to keep order. You're about to go off.
And we'll move into public excluded too.
Do you want to move into public excluded?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. Can I have a mover? Okay, we've got a mover, we've got a seconder.
Procedural motion for the question.
Procedural motion. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. No nays. That's carried. We're in public excluded.